Last week, I went to Costco to run some errands. I personally have a GI condition, which allows me the ability to park in the disabled parking space. So I do just that, parking in one of the only spots available, until I happen to see a van which also has a disability placard hanging from their mirror. I figured, since they have a van, they must have a person in need of a wheelchair inside. So I figured, I can walk a few more feet. They deserve this spot more than me. I started backing out my car when, all of a sudden, enter an entitled Karen. As I backed out to give the van space to park, a woman in a pristine Cadillac sedan, without a disabled parking placard mind you, whips in between my car and the van to park in the disabled parking spot. Both the driver in the van and I were pissed. I think understandably so. But Karen was the only one who got out of her car and started letting the van lady have it. I'm usually the pick-your-own-battles type of person, so I backed off, but I still watched from a distance. Karen's in the midst of flying off the handle on her, probably projecting, although I couldn't hear everything that was being said. I knew that no matter what it was, she couldn't defend her actions. I did notice on her bumper that she had a Canadian license plate. We live in Florida for what it's worth. This is going to come back into play in just a little bit. But at the time, I thought it was funny given that people stereotype Canadians as being overtly friendly, which was the polar opposite of this lady's demeanor. So Canada Karen says her piece, storms off inside to do her shopping or whatever, and the van lady picked up her phone and started calling someone. I could only presume that it was the police. I'd wanted to tell her that she'd be better off getting an employee because it'd take a long time for dispatch to send someone here, since honestly, our PD is usually lazy as hell, and Karen would likely be gone by then. But strangely enough, it didn't take more than 5 minutes for a squad car to show up. Canada Karen hadn't even made it back to her car until a few minutes after the cops showed up. This time, I was outside giving the police officer my side of the story, considering I was a witness. Canada Karen, who I'm going to refer to as CK for the rest of the story, of course, got into a tiff, and this is how it went. Officer: Ma'am, do you understand that 1, you almost hit these 2 vehicles, and 2, you can't park in a disabled parking spot if you're not authorized or don't have a placard? CK: Oh no, officer, you're entirely misreading the situation. These 2 were fighting over the spot, and while they were, I just pulled in. No harm, right? The gaslighting here. That's when I speak up. No. I was letting her park because she needed the spot more than I did, while I motioned over at van lady and the grandson that was in the back of the van to hopefully give this woman a hint. The grandson has cerebral palsy and is wheelchair bound. CK scoffs. Clearly, you don't even look disabled. If he could park here, then why can't I park here too? Officer: Ma'am, I noticed you have Ontario plates. How long have you been here in the States? CK starts sweating bullets at this point. She probably thought he was going to question her legal status or something. CK: Well, you see, I moved in with my husband. He's American and... Officer: Ma'am, this car is registered to you, not to your husband, and you haven't answered my questions. How long have you lived here in the States? CK: About a year now. Big mistake. Ma'am, you understand that according to Florida law, any non-US citizen living in the state longer than a 6-month period must register their vehicle within 10 days of entering the country, correct? If Karen's jaw dropped any lower at that particular moment, it would have fallen off. I'm afraid I'm going to have to write you up on a $500 fine for an inability to register within 10 days of entry, and an additional $250 fine for unauthorized parking in a disability parking space. When they handed Canada Karen her ticket, she snatched it out of the officer's hand and stormed back to her car, still angry, but add embarrassment into the mix. Before I left the scene to finally get my own shopping done, I went up to van lady and asked her if she needed any more help. She said she was all right and thanked me. I told her it was amazing how quickly the cops showed up, and that's when she laid this truth on me. Apparently, she didn't dial 911. She called her son, who was the police chief of our town. The same son who just so happened to be the father of her grandson with cerebral palsy. As a dad who has a son on the spectrum, I know this more than anything. Hell hath no fury like a parent when their child with special needs is mistreated. Once this dad heard that this batshit crazy lady stole a parking spot from his own son, who needed that spot and wasn't able to defend himself, he immediately sent an officer to hopefully de-escalate the situation, and our police station just happened to be up the road. Luckily, once Karen left with her $750 a-hole tax in tow, van lady and her grandson were able to park in the spot and continue on with their day, and me with mine. I think the moral of this entire story is don't create drama if you don't want the karma. I'll have to be a little vague with some of the details to my story, mostly out of professionalism, but also because it's not worth blowing anyone up publicly. Still, this is one of those stories that lives rent-free in my head, not because of the drama at the time, but because of the delicious, slow-cooked comeuppance that played out years later. For the sake of this story, my name is John. This all started about 10 years ago, when I was brought in to salvage a failing company. When I say failing, I mean flatlining. This place had already been gutted. What was once a 50-person operation was down to 3 shell-shock survivors by the time I showed up. The company made highly custom, small batch parts with tight tolerances, stuff that required precision, niche expertise, and a lot of process discipline. Great potential, but absolutely mismanaged. I came in as the cleanup crew. My job was to take this smoking crater and somehow turn it into a functioning, profitable business yet again. I knew going in that it wouldn't be glamorous, but it was a challenge that I was up for. Over the next couple of years, I rebuilt the place from the ground up. I restructured every department, cut out unnecessary steps, upgraded archaic systems, and even reinvested in smarter technology. I brought in lean practices, tighter quality control, better vendor relationships, essentially the works. We went from barely hanging on to generating $10 million in annual revenue. Our benchmark was $100,000 in profit per employee, going back to the parent company, and we hit that mark more than once. This wasn't just a recovery, it was a full-blown transformation. Then, enter Bob. Bob was someone I hired during that rebuilding phase. He wasn't a bad guy, and to be fair, he had a couple of technical skills that were solid enough. But that was about it. Bob didn't innovate. He didn't want to lead. He didn't take initiative. The most charitable way I can put it is that Bob was a body that could complete some tasks on time if you handed him a checklist and stood nearby. And as we grew, it became clear that just being okay wasn't going to be enough. Our standards had risen. The margin for mediocrity had evaporated. I didn't want to be cruel about it. I gave Bob 2 months' notice and sat him down for a very honest conversation. I told him, look, I'll give you a good review for what you're good at, truly, but I'm not going to lie. You're not exactly a fit here anymore. I'll be flexible with interview time. Just keep up your normal workload and let's keep this clean. Credit where it's due. Bob did just that. He didn't slack off or burn bridges. It was a low bar, but he cleared it. Eventually, Bob landed a new role at a company we happened to partner with from time to time. He didn't list me as a reference, which was smart on his part. I figured he was moving on. We were too. Everyone's happy, and there were no hard feelings. Years went by. I continued running the company and keeping the trajectory upward. Things were going well. Then, during a business trip, I flew out to visit that partner company. Just a regular check-in and relationship maintenance sort of thing. And who do I see waiting to greet me when I arrive? Bob, standing right there beside our main point of contact, Charlie. I won't lie, I was a little surprised by this. I gave him a quick handshake, a polite smile, the usual corporate pleasantries. He acted just as pleasantly right back. almost like we were old buddies catching up. It all seemed even-keeled and on the level, until Charlie opened his mouth. As we sat down to talk, Charlie started reminiscing about how lucky I was to have Bob back in the day. He went on and on about how transformative Bob's efforts were for the company. How he, quote, got us out of a mess and completely overhauled the operation. He was referencing specific decisions and innovations that Bob had nothing to do with. Things that I actually personally spearheaded, sweated over, and then executed. I'm sitting there listening to Charlie tell me to my face how this guy completely revolutionized the company that I built back brick by brick. And then, like a crumb of charity, Charlie added while looking straight at Bob, well, I guess John helped a little. A little? Well, I didn't lash out. I didn't throw Bob under the bus. I just smiled and said, well, I'm glad Bob found a good fit. I wrapped up my meeting, caught my flight home, and left it alone. But under the surface, I was furious. Not the kind of white-hot, impulsive anger that makes you do stupid things. No, this was colder. It was the slow-burning type of anger. The kind that simmers and lingers for years. I kept running the company for a while after that. Eventually, I moved on to a new opportunity and left the company in solid shape. The new general manager was someone I hired and trusted, and we stayed friends even after I stepped away. Of course, COVID hit not long after, and the whole industry took a few punches to the gut. But overall, the company weathered it. They were resilient. Meanwhile, Bob stayed at that partner company longer than I expected. Honestly, I was surprised he kept the gig. But eventually, and sure enough, the day came when Bob lost his job. And right around then is when things came full circle. I got a call from the general manager of my old company, the one that I'd left in charge. He said, hey, we've got an opening for a pretty key role here, and one of the applicants is Bob. I didn't work with him, but he's claiming he played a major part in turning the company around when you were in charge. Sounds like he was central to the whole recovery. Hey, you worked with him, right? I just wanted to get your thoughts. I'll admit, I sat there for a second and considered it. I thought about how easy it would be to just say, sure, he was fine, and just move on, but no, that wasn't the truth. So I told it. I gave him the same honest breakdown I gave Bob years earlier. I said Bob had a couple of decent skills. He did what he was told, but he was not a driver of change. He wasn't a leader, wasn't a strategist, and he certainly wasn't responsible for any of the things that he's taken credit for. That was my work, and frankly, it's disappointing that he's out there trying to rewrite history. The general manager thanked me for my candor. Bob didn't get that job. That was it. No dramatic confrontation, no chest thumping. Just a little truth spoken at the right time to the right person. I don't know where Bob is now. I haven't seen him in a while. Maybe he landed somewhere else. And wherever that is, I don't doubt that he's still out there rewriting his resume with someone else's accomplishments. But for once, the universe aligned just right. Someone who tried to step into the light with borrowed glory finally tripped over the truth. Just desserts aren't always swift, but sometimes they show up with perfect timing. And when they do, it's incredibly satisfying. This happened quite some time back. If I remember correctly, it was around the tail end of the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. Back when you still clocked into your job with a physical punch card. Security cameras recorded onto VHS tapes, and dial-up internet was practically the gold standard. I was working the graveyard shift at a particular 24-hour retail chain. Not one of the fancy ones, though. This was the kind of place where time felt like it just sat still, collecting dust along with the products on our back shelves. The overnight shift did something to me. Not just my body, but my brain. I became completely nocturnal, like full-blown vampire mode. The sun physically hurt my eyes by the time I stepped out of the store in the morning. I catch myself squinting and blinking like I hadn't seen daylight in weeks. And honestly, there were some weeks I barely had. I'd go home, sleep through the day hours, wake up at sunset, and do it all over again. That type of existence, it chips away at you. And I hated just about everything about it. The town I was in was a dead end. The kind where everyone knew everyone else's business but never offered any real help. My coworkers? Miserable, bitter people who seemed to have long since given up. The store itself? A glorified, fluorescent-lit prison. Every shift felt like a countdown to nothing. Well, somewhere along the way, I slipped into a kind of emotional purgatory. Too angry to keep going, yet too afraid to do anything permanent. So I started fantasizing. Just little what-if games to get me through stocking shelves at 3 a.m. What if I just walked out the door with the cash from the safe? What if I just disappeared? I'd have enough to get out of this town, start over and live. It became a mental escape hatch that I visited more and more often, but I always pulled myself back with one thought. Prison would be 1,000 times worse. Still though, that thought didn't wholly kill the fantasy. It just kept it in its cage. Until one night, during one of my rare nights off, I was venting to a good friend about it. Someone that I'd known since high school. Someone who had been through his own share of struggles. I laid it all out. How stuck I felt. How working nights had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. And how badly I just wanted out. I expected him to say what people usually say. Just quit. Or get a new job. Something useless like that, but instead, after a long, seemingly thoughtful silence, he leaned back in his chair, gave me this sideways grin and said, "You ever think about actually doing it?" I laughed at first, but then I realized he wasn't joking with me. What had started out as a desperate confession turned almost into a strategy session. I don't even know who suggested what first, but by the end of the night, we had a rough outline. It was stupid, risky, and maybe the only thing that had made me feel excited in months. Over the next 2 weeks, we turned that rough sketch into a full-blown plan. And we planned the hell out of it. We were gonna rob my job. We picked a night where I'd be scheduled alone for most of my shift, just with one other coworker who tended to take their break right around 2:30 a.m. and never returned a minute earlier than they needed to. We rehearsed every step, treating it like a stage performance. He'd wear a ski mask, long sleeves, gloves. Nothing that revealed skin tone, tattoos, or even his body type. The whole point was to prevent anyone from being able to confidently describe him, even if they were to see him. We even studied the store's camera system, which was ancient by today's standards. Grainy black and white video feeds recorded on looped VHS tapes that had to be switched out every 24 hours. The blind spots were obvious once you knew what to look for. Aisles where the angle missed most of the floor space. The loading dock with the flickering feed. The gap between the front counter and the office door. I showed him the path to take coming in and the best route out. One that didn't exactly give a clear view from the cameras. We timed everything down to the second. I even faked being sick and called out for a shift just to meet up and go over the final details in person. At that point, we were ready. The night of the plan, I was oddly calm, numb almost. I remember clocking in at 10 like nothing was different. Ate my usual vending machine dinner around midnight. At 2:25 a.m., my coworker stepped outside for their usual break. That's when I knew things were on. At 2:31 on the dot, he walked in. I'll admit, it was eerie how casual it looked. He came into the store during one of those long lulls between late-night customers and any early morning supply trucks. To anyone watching over a video feed, he'd look like just another person in a hoodie. But the moment that he pulled a fake gun from his waistband, that's when the show began. He pointed it straight at my face and barked, "Get your hands up." I threw them into the air like a rookie actor at a high school play. Eyes wide, knees shaking, the whole bit. "Please, don't shoot," I stammered. just loud enough to be caught on the audio feed that I knew was rolling. That's when he came around the counter, grabbed me by the collar, told me to take him to the back office. I let him, shaking like a leaf, doing my whole Meryl Streep. Within a few moments, we were in the office where the safe was. The safe itself wasn't anything high-tech. It was an old-time electronic model with a digital keypad and a time delay feature. I punched in the code and waited however long it took for it to unlock. During that time, we kept up the performance. He kept the gun trained on me while shouting orders, and I kept pleading, "I'll give you whatever you want, just don't hurt me." When the safe finally popped, he snatched the loose bills as well as the cash deposit bags from it. He stuffed them down his pants, then ordered me back to the front to empty the registers. I gave him everything: the petty cash, rolled coins, the entire drawer. Then, just like we planned, he took off out of the store. I gave him about a 5-minute head start. I sat there behind the counter pretending to hyperventilate, wiping fake sweat from my brow and tears from my eyes, trying not to laugh from the sheer adrenaline of it all. When I finally got it together, I stumbled out the front door to find my coworker who was tucked in the corner of the parking lot enjoying his final cigarette of his break. I told him what had happened, and I claimed I was way too freaked out to call the police. He called for me. The cops arrived within 10 minutes. I repeated the story that we'd rehearsed, complete with false details. He had an accent, maybe Eastern European. I couldn't tell how tall he was. He had a gun on me the whole time. No, I didn't recognize him. I don't think that he was from around here. Of course, they reviewed the tapes, but all they saw was what we wanted them to see. A masked man entering through the front, disappearing into the office with me, before exiting the store in a way that the cameras didn't pick up. No clear face, no identifiable traits. And it was clear after a few weeks, there was going to be no follow-up. The best part of it all, I didn't just avoid suspicion. I got a bonus. Corporate policy dictated that employees comply with robbers for safety reasons, and apparently I'd done such a good job de-escalating the situation that they rewarded me with a few $100 and a shiny little certificate, one that I immediately tossed into the trash. They even offered counseling, which I declined because I didn't want to risk saying too much under emotional pretense. Then I played my next card. I eventually told my bosses that the robbery had really shaken me up, and I didn't feel comfortable working overnights anymore. They didn't hesitate. They shifted me to evening shifts for the rest of the month. Well, after that time had run its course, I formally put in a transfer request to one of our locations in a bigger, more vibrant city, one that I'd always dreamed of moving to. Given the quote-unquote trauma I just endured, they processed that transfer faster than I thought possible. I think all said and done, it took a month, then I was gone. The money wasn't a massive fortune. It actually didn't even amount to 5 digits, but it was enough to cover my first couple months of rent, enough to enroll in my first college semester, enough to essentially hit reset on my entire damn life. I never looked back. I'm not telling you this story because I need to get it off my chest. I don't exactly feel guilty. I'm telling it because, for once, I did something for myself and it worked. It really, truly worked. The job was draining the life out of me. That town itself was a cage. And this heist, if you could even call it that, as dumb and dangerous as it might have been, cracked the bars wide open. No one got hurt. The company had insurance, and me, I got a second chance at living. Some people find escape in a suitcase or a scholarship, maybe a well-timed promotion. I found mine in a ski mask, a fake pistol, and a real friend. For this, I have 0 regrets. I was a single dad, became one pretty young too. My son was born when I was 18, not long after I'd married his mother. We were kids ourselves, really, but we were trying to make it work, trying to build a life together. And then when my son was just 4 years old, his mother died in a car accident. After that, it was just me and him, father and son, and we got by the best we could, although I won't pretend that it was easy. I was working full-time, doing whatever I could to keep a roof over our heads. He was a good kid though, smart, charming, one of those kids who could make anyone laugh and make friends wherever he went. He was good looking too. All the girls seemed to love him. But as he got older, things started to shift. When he hit his teenage years, something changed. At around 16, he started heading off into the city, Manhattan mostly, and hanging out with older crowds, different kinds of people. At first, it was little stuff. I remember catching him and a group of his friends on a stoop nearby with a 6-pack of beer. I was disappointed, sure, but not exactly shocked. I mean, that's the kind of thing I did when I was a teen. Most of us did. It's not right, but it wasn't unfamiliar either. It just didn't stop there. He started going out more often, coming home later, ignoring all attempts at a curfew. I'd tell him no, and he'd just do whatever he wanted anyway. I'd ground him, and he'd walk out like it meant nothing. There came a point where I realized I couldn't control him anymore. And when he went off to college, that's when things really spiraled. During his first year, he was a completely different person. He was partying hard. Coke, ecstasy, weed every day. Drinking just about as often, and hooking up with strange women constantly. He'd have girls over when I wasn't home, and sometimes even when I was. I tried setting rules, drawing lines and giving some clear boundaries, but he just didn't care. He'd ignore me, brush off everything I said, and honestly, I didn't know what to do. He was legally an adult. I couldn't exactly force him into behaving. But then came the breaking point. One night, he brought over 2 people, a guy and a girl, friends of his. They blasted music, smoked weed inside the apartment, and even raided my wine cabinet. I woke up the next morning to an utter mess. Ash on furniture, empty bottles everywhere. The house reeking like a party had gone down. And that's when I snapped. I confronted him, furious, and we had a huge fight. I told him that this couldn't keep happening, yet he barely reacted. That's when I noticed something else. Some of my liquor was missing. I kept a few expensive bottles in a separate cabinet, stuff I rarely touched. But 5 of them were gone, probably close to $300 worth. I asked him about it, and he gave me this half-hearted shrug, said something like, "Oh, maybe one of them took it. I didn't see." No apology, no attempt at making it right, just plain indifference. But I didn't kick him out then. I should have. I almost did. But I held back thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I just needed to let things cool down. But less than a week later, I came home to find him and the exact same 2 people in the apartment yet again. Like none of it ever happened. Like there hadn't been any consequences at all. And that was it. I completely lost it at that point. The other 2 left quickly once they saw how angry I was, but he stayed. We got into it worse than ever before. I was so furious that I started yelling at him in Russian, which I only ever do when I'm truly at my limit. I told him that he needed to get out, that I couldn't have him in the house anymore, and I meant it. I would call the police and report what had been stolen. His friends, the drugs, the alcohol, everything. I'll never forget the way that he looked at me. He didn't fight back this time, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there looking completely broken. Like there was something he wanted to say, something that was building inside of him, just waiting to come out, but he never said it. I think that I scared him out of it. He just nodded slowly and walked out the door. I didn't hear from him after that. I figured he was staying at a friend's place or with one of his girlfriends. He'd done that before, gone off for a few days without checking in. I kept telling myself that maybe this time it would stick. Maybe this would be the wake-up call that he needed, that he'd realize he couldn't treat our home or me that way and still expect to come and go as he pleased. I wasn't planning to shut him out forever. I just wanted some basic respect in my own home. That he wouldn't steal from me. That he wouldn't bring the same people back into our home who had just taken from us. I just needed him to meet me halfway. 2 days later, I got a call from the police. They'd found him in Jamaica, Queens, and he'd shot himself. I don't know where he got the gun. It was 2001. Back then, it was still possible to find one under the table if you knew the right people, but I'd never known him to have one. It completely shattered me. I remember just sitting there, listening to the words of the officer, but not really hearing them. My son was gone, and all I could think about was our last conversation. The fight and the way he looked at me when I kicked him out. I didn't tell anyone the truth at first. I was ashamed. I thought that if people knew that I'd kicked him out just days before he took his own life, they'd blame me. Maybe not out loud, but certainly in their minds and in their hearts. And I was already doing enough of that on my own. Eventually, I confided in an ex-girlfriend of mine. We'd stayed friends even after our breaking up, and I trusted her. I told her everything, that I was the one who kicked him out, how I felt responsible for him not being there anymore. She looked at me and just said, "That's not your fault." I wanted to believe her. I still do, but it's hard. Only a few people know what really happened between us in those final days, and I still don't know if what I did was the reason. I keep thinking back to the look in his eyes when I was yelling, like he had something to say, something important to him, but he never got the chance. And then I'm left to wonder, was that the reason? Or was it just a coincidence? A horrible, tragic coincidence? Maybe he'd already made up his mind long before I kicked him out. If that were the case, then nothing I did or didn't do would have changed the outcome. But how do you ever really know? It's been many years since then. I eventually remarried, and my wife and I have 4 kids together now. She's a wonderful woman, and we built a good life. My kids are doing well. None of them have gone down the same path that he did. Their biggest issue is probably just spending too much time on their phones or staying up too late gaming. But I still think about my first son every single day. He was a mess, yeah. He made reckless decisions, treated life like it was a game. But he was so smart, so funny. He had charm for days. He knew just how to make people like him. He got along with all kinds of people. He had potential, real potential. If things had gone differently, I think that he would have gone far in this world. He just didn't get the chance to see it through. And I'll always wonder why.